Now here is Ticky Fullerton on Your Money.
Hello there, I'm Ticky Fullerton, every night bringing you a full hour of the very best in business coverage across the nation and internationally, especially where business and politics meet. Coming up, an 11th hour deal done for Britain to leave Europe. The top Brexit expert in Australia, CEO of the Australian British Chamber of Commerce, David McCredie, explains what it all means. Spotlight on Super, the all-powerful. We talk with Super's peak body ASFA CEO Martin Fahy. What about what he makes of it all and all the talk around Super's influence, especially what it means for listed companies. And a report card for the big four banks, on track for the overhaul of staff pay, but still behind on the fee for no service failures. Australian Banking Association CEO Bligh will join us later in the show. Could Brexit be the impasse? Could it finally be over? Theresa May seemed to think so this morning, late evening French time in Strasbourg. She joined the increasingly sullen European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker to announce the breakthrough, a legally binding addition to the Brexit withdrawal agreement ticked off by Europe, which Theresa May takes back for the British Parliament to vote on today. Here's an understandably rather tired-voiced Mrs May.
Having an insurance policy to guarantee that there will never be a hard border in Northern Ireland is absolutely right. It honours the UK's solemn commitments in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement.
Now, Herr Juncker was adamant that this was absolutely the last change. He's given so much ground in the whole process, after all. The last change. Take it or leave it.
The backstop is an insurance policy. Nothing more, nothing less. The intention is not for it to be used, like in every insurance policy. And if it were ever to be used, it will never be a threat. If either side were to act in bad faith, there is a legal way for the other party to exit.
Well, back here, the market today was left speculating on what might happen in the British Parliament after the Prime Minister shuttles back to London. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has already said he'll vote against the new deal, tweeting, "It was a bad deal in December and 3 months later, nothing has changed." He'd rather stay in Europe, all being equal, of course. Well, at the other extreme, UKIP founder and Brexiteer Nigel Farage tweeted, "This is all words and twisted meanings. Nothing has changed. Reject, reject, reject." The website leave.eu is tweeting rather humorously, "I thought that the PM is returning from Strasbourg with a message of peace for our time," heavily implying she'll have about as much luck as Disraeli there. But for many other British MPs, including DUP members, it's possible that this change will be enough for their vote. Key to this is what the independent legal advice that the PM's Attorney General Geoffrey Cox will give Mrs May on her new deal. All will be revealed. Well, for more analysis on this and what to expect in the week ahead, I spoke with CEO of the Australian British Chamber of Commerce, David McCredie. David McCredie, we have heard and seen Theresa May this morning sounding rather croaky in Strasbourg. Has she really managed to get this Brexit breakthrough?
Well, I think so. It certainly seems that both her and Jean-Claude Juncker are painting it that way. We're yet to hear from Geoffrey Cox, the Attorney General, who will provide his independent legal advice on the matter before the Parliament debates it in Westminster tomorrow. So
you've always said this would come down to the wire. This is leaving it very close. We remember as well Theresa May a couple of months ago, coming back with what she said was a deal from Europe, not releasing legal advice around the backstop, and of course it led to an absolute furore. What are the chances of this being good enough to succeed with her vote tomorrow?
Well, I think it goes back to the votes that we saw earlier in the year. Clearly, when her deal was eventually voted on, it was soundly beaten by one of the highest ever margins in the Parliament for a sitting government to suffer the humiliation of...
In history.
over 230 votes. So it was very clear that the Parliament weren't going to accept the deal as it was. And a fortnight later, when the amendment debates happened and the two amendments went forward, there were two outcomes that were supported in the number of amendments that were put forward, one of which was that the Parliament would support a deal over a no-deal Brexit. So they were very keen to see a deal happen. And the second one was that if the Irish backstop arrangements, if there could be alternative arrangements, were the words used in the amendment, found, then the deal would be sufficient to pass the House. That was the second amendment. Now, is this deal sufficient? Well, clearly that's the way it's being painted by both Theresa May and Jean-Claude Juncker. They made an announcement. It was very late in Strasbourg when they made the announcement last night, or this morning Australian time, and the details haven't come out yet. However, Theresa May did say that Geoffrey Cox would provide that legal advice, his independent legal advice, to the House before the debate starts later this evening, our time.
Yeah. So, I mean, I come back to the fact that Theresa May promised that this wouldn't hurt a bit last time, that her deal around the Irish backstop was very sound. Turned out that it wasn't at all. Jean-Claude Juncker this time says this is it. He's not actually changed the withdrawal agreement, has he?
No, so, and this is where it becomes a bit more complicated than just some simple ideas. There's the withdrawal agreement, which the EU have been very positive the whole way along about, we have agreed this deal, that is the deal.
Which is unacceptable to Brexiteers, for example. Correct.
But what they have done is there is a legally binding, and the words used this morning was, it's a legally binding amendment to the bill, to the withdrawal agreement, which allows either the EU or the UK to unilaterally leave the backstop arrangements. So the biggest concern about the backstop arrangements, as expressed in Parliament, has been, and indeed by many of the Brexiteers, not least of which is Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson, the idea of a vassal state, because we're stuck in this place where we're not allowed to leave unilaterally. Therefore, the EU can play us for forever, and we're stuck in the same situation. What this agreement says, from the few words that were spoken at the press conference, it's very, very brief analysis that you can give on a very few words. But what they've clearly said is that there would be an arbitration, and if at the end of that arbitration there wasn't a resolution, then the parties would be able to go their own way. Now, the important thing to remember here, of course, is the backstop is an insurance policy, and Jean-Claude Juncker was very clear on that. Several times reiterating, and indeed in the questions afterwards reiterating yet again,
that they don't intend to use it.
They don't intend to use the withdrawal agreement at any point in time. The withdrawal agreement they will use, but the backstop is not part of what they intend to use in the future. Their aim and their ambition, and indeed Jean-Claude Juncker made it very clear that Michel Barnier and his team are ready to start the negotiations on the future arrangements now that the withdrawal bill has been settled, which has been the EU position the whole way along. That group is determined, Jean-Claude Juncker was pointing out, to have the arrangements in place so that the UK could exit on the 31st of December next year, the end of 2020, as per programme, and basically there's nothing to see here.
Right. Well, we've had the head of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, come out and say he doesn't want any part of this. We've also had Nigel Farage, from former UKIP leader, a rampant Brexiteer, saying reject, reject, reject. What do you think the main body, the crucial votes, will do for Theresa May?
Well, it really comes down to what were the votes that supported that amendment which said we would prefer a deal to no deal. Has she done enough to convert those people who clearly weren't supporting the deal when she lost by 230? Are there enough of those who are now convinced that this deal is good enough to meet that we'd prefer to leave with a deal than no deal threshold? And to be honest, the way the UK Parliament is at the moment, I'd be a very game individual to predict that it's absolutely fine and it will all sail through. I think it probably will.
There's a lot riding on this, though, for the Prime Minister, isn't there?
There is a lot riding on it. I mean, there's been suggestions already this week that because of the way this has panned out, that she should resign as Prime Minister. There's been some discussion by commentators that the way she could get votes would be to say, if you vote my deal through, I'll resign. There's all sorts of different pieces of information flying around in Westminster and in the press more broadly. But I think really what she should look for is the bulk of the Tory party supported that piece, the vote to say that we'd have no deal rather than, have a deal rather than no deal. Yes. And a number of Labor MPs crossed the floor to vote with the government on that. There are a number of Tories who voted the other way. The DUP supported it. So if the DUP and the same sort of people, it may not be an exact match, are prepared to support this deal rather than no deal, then she'll be home.
Right. And for those who think, right, we'd rather have a no deal, it's not as simple as that either, is it, as an alternative? Well,
no deal isn't...
on the table at the moment, is it?
Well, it is, but there are a number of steps. Everything... I mean, the Times in London has a wonderful flowchart, and if you haven't had a look, I highly recommend going and having a look at their website. It's got all of the various decision points and how each one of them might turn out. I tried looking at it on my mobile phone the first time around. You need a widescreen telly, probably several of them. But look, the reality is that the Prime Minister has got this to a point where the deal could be acceptable to the Parliament tomorrow. She's already said last week that her strategy for this week is vote for the deal. The deal is now amended as the Parliament requested at the last time out. So on the basis that she's done what they've asked, she would hope that it goes through. If it doesn't go through, then the secondary and tertiary votes that she promised last week would go ahead thereafter. And that is a second vote on Wednesday or Thursday morning our time, where the Parliament would be asked, do you support leaving with no deal? And if that got up, obviously the UK would leave with no deal.
If it didn't, though?
If it didn't get up, then the third vote, the tertiary vote, is, well, we need an extension to figure out what we do want. Yes. And in that case, it was about how long would the extension potentially be. And
if Europe said no to an extension, then the default would be presumably a no deal.
Correct.
If they said yes to an extension, look out for how long it should be, I suppose.
Well, and Sir Keir Starmer, the opposition spokesperson on Brexit, has indicated that about 3 months would be about the limit that the Labor Party would look to support. Yeah.
But they don't want to run into these European parliamentary elections, because all hell will break loose if Britain has to be part of that.
Well, I think if you're only talking about 3 months, the period between now and June, the European Parliament, although the elections, they're at the back end, the 26th of May, so it's late in the piece there. By the time the Parliament would actually form and sit, it'd be some time after that. So I think there's a reasonable bandwidth there, given that there's a couple of things that have to be remembered. The deal has to be ushered through the Parliament in the UK, and whether or not there is actually time to do that will be interesting to see, whether the House of Lords play ball with that, or whether just the House of Commons is okay to progress. There are a number of pieces there, but if there's no deal, and and it is that third vote, and the repercussions from that, it'll be very interesting to see whether the 27 want to agree to a 3-month extension.
All right, well, Theresa May has got a lot riding on this first vote. David McCredie, thank you very much for explaining it all to us.
My pleasure.
After the break, ASFA CEO Martin Fahy on the growing powers of Australian super funds.
You're watching Ticky on Your Money. Now, back to Ticky.
Welcome back. Let's go back to where all the money is heading these days. Super. What a responsibility the boards of trustees of our super funds, both retail and industry, now have for the $2.7 trillion odd dollars in savings of Australians. Representing the whole sector, so industry and retail, is peak body ASFA, and its CEO, Martin Fahy, came by a short time ago to talk budget and how funds will be handling their growing influence over business. Martin Fahy, thanks for coming in. Let's talk about super and the budget first. You represent both retail funds and industry funds. What are you all hoping for and what are you worried about?
I think what the sector is looking for is stability in the settings and the regulations. Every budget that we've had for the last 30 years has changed something with respect to super. The changes that were made a number of years ago around the caps have made the system more sustainable and we think more equitable, so we'd like to see that. But there are other things that we could do to make the system better. Introducing superannuation for people working in the gig economy, removing the 450
Yes, because
threshold.
at the moment, what, Uber drivers, they don't contribute?
They're essentially self-employed, and as such, it's up to them to make the contribution. There's no compulsion there. We think that if you think about people in the gig economy maybe as dependent contractors, I think it's to everybody's benefit if they were required to make superannuation contributions. We'd also like to see the 450 threshold on super contributions, you know, the fact that you need to make more than that a week before
$450.
$450 before you're liable to get super. We'd like to see that removed because, again, it's part of the changing nature of employment. Super unpaid parental leave to address the really awful pervasive problem of low balances for
So some changes
women.
you'd like.
We'd like to see changes that are really around improving the way system operates and the efficiency of the system to deliver good retirement outcomes.
Now, there is a Royal Commission going on into aged care. We talked to a business like Household Capital last week, which is designing sort of long-term financial advice around super, dipping into the family home. Are we expecting to see much from the budget in this space at all, do you think?
It's impossible to tell at this stage, but we do know that the vexed issue that we have around retirement funding is the trade-off. So at the moment, we know that people underconsume in retirement. We know that they have, in many cases, too many illiquid capital assets in the form of the household, and they are probably over-bequesting. And so what we'd like to see is we'd like to dial down the bequest, dial in some liquidity and dial up consumption so that people are younger and healthier for longer, not older and sicker for longer is the ideal.
OK, big question. Should Australians be scared of the power that superannuation businesses are now wielding?
There's no reason to be afraid or have concerns around a tremendous piece of public policy that has accumulated savings for Australians. Superannuation funds aren't some remote third-party, you know, source of power and underhand behaviour in the stock exchange. Ultimately, the money that sits in superannuation funds belongs to the members. It's governed by the superannuation provisions. The sole purpose test says it can only be used for the benefit of the members to deliver retirement outcomes, and funds have to act in the member interest.
Well, and the Royal Commission into Financial Services has, you know, bolted that down by attaching civil penalties to any of the trustees who are not doing exactly that. I was thinking more that there are a few very powerful people now who can influence where vast amounts of money goes. There are concerns this week, where I know raised in the Fen and other places, about the fact that superannuation may now decide to take whole listed companies off the boards.
So let's distinguish sort of, you know, anecdote from the data. The first thing is that none of the funds, including the largest funds, have accumulated anything like a significant shareholding in any one particular company. It's very unusual for a superannuation fund, even any other big fund, to hold more than 3 or 4%. And the reason for that is they want to diversify their shareholdings from a risk point of view. The second thing is, if you look back over 15 years, from 2004 to 2019, funds under management in superannuation have gone up 4 times. The ASX capitalisation's gone up 2.5 times. We've seen the holdings by superannuation funds go from about 25% of the capital value of the ASX to about 33%. It's a very modest increase, given that the capitalisation's gone up 2.5 times.
To your first point,
and we still hold. Superannuation funds had 33% of their investment in 2004 in Australian listed equities. They've now only got 22%.
Right,
so the influence has actually gone down.
OK, well, to your first point, exactly on that, actually, I spoke to Heather Ridout, chairman of Australian Super, and I asked her about the HealthScope situation, the Navitas situation that Aussie Super and private equity firm BGH found themselves in. And she said, oh, no, you can expect to see more of this, she said. And she said you can expect to see us holding for now about 3% private equity of our fund, and it'll go up to, she reckons, about 10%. So she's saying, no, we're going to do much more of this.
I think what we have to be careful about here is understanding the asset allocation strategies of a system that is increasing towards $4 trillion. Australia's listed equity market is relatively small by global standards. If we were to pro-rata that to the actual size of the Australian economy, funds would only have 4 or 5% here. Because of all sorts of reasons of asset allocation, it's about 22. The reality is, though, that public markets have become hyper efficient with indexing and passive investment. They become hyper efficient, and therefore the ability to outperform has been removed. Private capital markets, whether these are debt markets, buyout funds, alternative listed assets, private equity, etc., have across the cycle generated returns beyond that. The beauty of the interplay of diverse allocations of listed and unlisted assets is that you can distribute risk in terms of managing the correlations,
yes,
but you can also take a longer term view away from the demands of quarterly earnings in the US, where you're really on a treadmill, yes, around that. And so for a longer term investor who wants to turn around a company, who wants to make and create shareholder value for the members of the fund, there is times when it's appropriate to participate in private assets.
Are we going to, as small shareholders, are they going to lose out in terms of opportunity to invest on the ASX in a diversified portfolio as a result of super moving in and taking companies off board?
Well, there's very clear requirements around protection of minorities and not oppressing minority shareholders in organisations. I think what we've seen, though, is the capability that's been built in Australian financial services, that increasingly the professionalisation of managing funds in APRA-regulated funds means that people are getting really, really good returns. The Productivity Commission pointed this out. If we look across the top performing 25 funds scoring 8 to 10%, the Productivity Commission found that the average self-managed funded retiree with less than $1 million was struggling to get anywhere close to those returns. So you think about a professional team of investors in our largest funds. Yes. This is the best talent that you can acquire, managing and investing at wholesale rates. Let's compare two situations. I've got a young tradie going to work this morning at 22 years of age, and I've got a 55-year-old who's managing their own money. That young tradie gets to invest at wholesale rates like Warren Buffett and has some of the best talent in this country managing their money, where they get to invest in a diverse set of assets internationally, etc. That's a really good thing. Somebody, however well-intentioned, managing their own money is against the weight of the market, the weight of professional investors, and the weight of the vagaries of the market and diversification. So these funds are well-established, well-run and professional.
You can say this now because we've had this incredible market behind us, and there's no doubt that industry funds in particular have had, I'm not so sure about some of the retail funds, but industry funds in particular have done very well in terms of returns. Now, what about ESG? Because that's another area that's raising sort of, we're all becoming aware of this. Now we've seen Climate Action 100 Plus, where some of your members have been a part of that. They pushed Glencore back from new coal production and exploration now. What about the latest concerns about some of your members potentially being influenced by unions on those boards to use superannuation leverage of their investment in listed companies to force listed boards to raise wages?
So the SIS Act, which governs the operation of APRA-regulated funds and the superannuation sector, is very clear about the duties of trustees with respect to the sole purpose test, so the reasons they invest and how they manage their members' money, and also the requirement to act in the members' interest. And as you said, the Hayne Royal Commission was very, very clear about this. I can't speak for individual funds, but what I do know and what I can say is that ESG has been a powerful force for change in delivering outcomes beyond just a pure profit motive in terms of the long-term sustainability. The role of ESG is perfectly compatible with maximising the long-term savings of a retiree.
So you'd argue that the duty to the member is both one of return, but also one to make sure you're investing in things that, say, don't blow up when the community moves on from it.
Well, when we talk about, changes in the market in terms of the likelihood of whether it's particular sources of energy, whether it's particular particular activities within the industry, whether it's the automotive sector, etc. The Schumpeter, the creative destructive process of a Schumpeter-type economy means that old industries give rise to new industries, and the process by which we recycle that capital does involve ESG considerations, and the early adopters may or may not outperform. What we do know, though, is our funds are acting in the members' interest and are acutely aware of that.
Yeah, exactly. So, but we've had diversity, we've had climate change. Now we're moving on to industrial relations, which certainly on the industry fund side, sort of flashing lights come up for a lot of people because of the union representation on boards, and there is this concern that it might be a slightly agenda-driven thing rather than a long-term sustainability thing.
The question of representation on boards, I think, has been established before and addressed in terms that there's representatives, both employer groups and employee groups. I have no doubt that investment committees, when they are looking at individual assets, asset allocation decisions, are acutely aware of their obligations under the SIS Act and their duties to members. And I think it's
someone
important.
Like Heather Ridder, for example, when she says, you know, I've got Dan Walton and Innes Willocks on my board, and they're just like cats and dogs, so they'd have those views, but I'm confident of the way forward. You'd support that? I
think there's governance in place, and we look at it at the primary legislation. If we look at it in the regulations, we've got really powerful regulators who've very clearly signalled that they are going to be more intrusive. Australians sitting at home this afternoon today with their superannuation and APRA regulated funds, I think, can feel very, very secure about funds acting in their interest and their interest only in pursuit of the sole purpose of their retirement funding.
Martin Fahy, great to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Aviation news. The 737 is one of the best-selling aeroplanes in history, with thousands of aircraft in service around the world. But the plane's design was updated in recent years to be more efficient, with Virgin Australia set to receive 30 of them from the end of the year. The airline has now released a statement saying there's still enough time to consider the outcome of this investigation that we've been reading about and make an assessment, this terrible tragedy. But there are currently no plans to cancel the order. Aaron Young explains.
The parallels between the Ethiopian crash and the Lion Air crash can't be ignored or denied. Both brand new 737-8 MAX jets, the latest plane released from Boeing. The 737 MAX is Boeing's answer to airlines wanting more fuel-efficient aircraft. To do that, they had to change the plane's design. So they raised the nose gear, placed the engine higher and forward. The engines are also heavier. That affects the plane's balance. So Boeing updated the onboard software. That is meant to stop the plane from stalling. So the sensor and the connected software are brand new. They weren't used in previous models of the 737. Many pilots, though, have not been told that. So Virgin Australia is the only carrier here that's ordered the new plane, 30 of them due from this November. Virgin tells us it's watching closely but currently has no plans to cancel their order, despite other airlines and nations currently grounding the fleet. The Civil Aviation Safety Authority telling Sky News at this stage it's watching to see how its American counterpart, the FAA, responds. The FAA already has warned airlines that the sensor condition, if not addressed, could actually lead to significant altitude loss and possible impact with terrain. So the Virgin Independent Pilots Association also weighing in, saying it has the utmost confidence in the Boeing 737 and the rigorous training that Virgin Australia provides its pilots. Boeing says it is currently providing technical assistance to the crash investigators, but with more than 5,000 orders on the line and 350 delivered so far, there is a lot at stake for a company that prides itself on aviation safety.
After the break, National Seniors Australia calling for a federal budget to spend more on aged care. Chief Advocate Ian Henschke, join me next.
This is Ticky on Your Money, covering the big business stories.
Welcome back. Well, next Monday, the other Royal Commission, the one into aged care, kicks off its second session focusing on home care. We've already heard awful stories about service and fee gouging. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? But there are also big structural problems, you'd think, and the elephant in the room seems to be that there's simply not enough money to go around. The home care wait list currently stands at over 126,000 people wanting help, wanting to stay out of nursing homes. Well, peak oldies group, National Seniors Australia, has now upped its calls from a doubling to a tripling of level 3 and 4 home care packages. National Seniors Australia Chief Advocate Ian Henschke joins me live from our Adelaide studio. Ian, great to see you there. Of course, Adelaide was where it was all kicked off in terms of investigations, I suppose. What are you asking for, hoping for from the budget?
Well, I think this is an opportunity now for the government to actually take some action. We don't have to wait till the end of the Aged Care Royal Commission to discover what the problems are. You've just put it in a nutshell there, Ticky. Beautifully expressed, 126,000 plus people waiting. To put that into perspective, that's the MCG completely full, packed with people, with 26,000 people waiting outside. And some of those people that are outside waiting are dying while they're waiting. This is what the Royal Commission's heard. In fact, they were terrible stories so far. The Royal Commission's had a session already in Adelaide. It's now taking to the regions, coming back to Adelaide, as you said, to look at home care. But we know that people want to stay in their own homes. There's a report that's just come out today that says that only 14% of Australians die in their own home, but nearly half of all Australians questioned would say they'd like to. We know from National Seniors research that most Australians want to be cared for in their home, not go into a home.
What is stopping this? Is it just money? Is it that the networks aren't there? Is it that people don't actually understand? I mean, I, for one, don't actually know what the difference between a level 3 and a level 4 package actually is.
Well, I can tell you what they are because I can tell you from personal experience. My brother put a submission into National Seniors and I encouraged him to put it directly into the Royal Commission, and it was about the situation with his wife. She had an inoperable tumour on her brain. She wanted to be cared for at home. He put in for an aged care package. He received notification 1 year after she was dead that the package was available. Now, that is not that's not an uncommon story. What we are hearing at the Royal Commission is stories about people who are waiting. One of them was Kay Warriner. She went to the Royal Commission. She talked about her husband, who has been waiting on the waiting list for so long that he's now suffering mental anxiety, mental issues about it, and he's got all sorts of physical problems. She wants to care for him at home, and you have these levels of care, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. By the time you get beyond level 4, you really are in an aged care home because there's not sufficient care that can be provided. But look, the situation is this. It's far, far more cost effective to keep people at home. We know that. So even from a pure economic point of view, the government should just simply let the moths out of its wallet, put its heart where it says it is, and actually get rid of that waiting list at level 3 and 4. They're the people that, if they don't get that package, will either die on the waiting list or they'll be forced into an aged care home because people can't look after them. And so, Ticky, I'll give you a couple of quick figures. 400,000 people in Australia are suffering from dementia at the moment, and a lot of them need help. Yeah.
Can they be looked after at home? If you've got low-level dementia, you presumably can be looked after at home.
Yes, that's exactly right. And look, there are some great home care providers out there, people that come around and they provide you with a couple of hours a day. They come in the morning, they help you get out of bed. I mean, there was at the Royal Commission we had a wonderful story about a woman who said that the last thing she wanted to do was go into a home. She had a stroke when she was 64. She's now 72. And she's been living at home for the last 8 years with a combination of a level 4 home care package and also a Commonwealth Home Support Program scheme as well. She needs the two of them together, but she says there's no way she wants to go into a home. She was a very senior public servant in Canberra, and she said that she's used up all the money, basically to stay at home, and she needs that help as well. It comes down to a couple of hours a day, but that makes the difference between her living at home, in her own home, rather than being into an aged care home.
Ian, do you think, I mean, of course, the big issue now is the unlocking the value of the family home. What progress is being made there, do you think, and will anything work in the budget on that?
Well, politically, that has always been a problem for all parties. If you ask the major parties, they'll say, look, it's a no-go area. But very interestingly, Ticky, you might remember from last year's budget, there was a pension loan scheme which is now available to all Australians, not just pensioners, kicks in on July the 1st this year, and that enables people to actually have access to the equity in their home through Centrelink. And you can get, as a couple, $56,000 a year. Now, I can see people in the future using some of that money for home care. We do know that there are a lot of people out there at the moment who are paying extra. They're not just getting these packages from the government for nothing. They actually have to contribute to them themselves. And then I've also spoken to a home care provider. He told me about a very famous Australian recently, a senior figure in business who made it to 100 years of age, and he was still working, and they were still assisting him to work, and they were still providing care for him virtually around the clock. So there are a lot of people out there that want to actually pay some of their money towards their home care.
Yes. And
look, the most important thing, though, is that you don't want to have a system where the rich can afford the care and the poor don't get any care. I mean, you've got to make it equitable.
So what are you... I mean, you must be talking to people both state and in Canberra. Is there a you know, dropping the ball between the two? And what are you expecting from the budget?
Well, one of the things that we're pointing out, and look, it's coming out in the Royal Commission every time someone talks about the cost shifting, guess what happens? You see, an aged care home will now put someone into an ambulance and send them to the hospital, and the state ends up picking up the cost of that. We know there's cost shifting going on. What we know is that if we keep people in their own home, as I said at the beginning of this interview, it is going to cost a lot less for the government if we provide them with even some of the services that are in the hospital at home. That they can keep people at home with palliative care and other activities like that as well. So, I mean, I really think governments, both at a state and federal level, have to get together and say, look, we know what the problems are. I mean, the figures are extraordinary. I mean, by 2056, there will be more than 1 million Australians living with dementia. So we know that we need a workforce. Ken Wyatt addressed the press club last year, and he said that they are going to need a workforce of 1 million people. The ABS is giving the Royal Commission the figures. The thing is, the government, whichever government wins this next election, has to face up to this. This is not a problem that has gone under the radar. This problem is well and truly above the radar, and the bureaucrats, the people in taxation, the people in Treasury, the people in health, they've got to get together and they've got to fix it.
Ian Henschke, thank you so much for your time. That's great.
Thank you very much, Ticky.
Well, let's come back to New South Wales. The state could be headed for a minority government for the first time in 24 years. An exclusive news poll conducted for The Australian has revealed the Coalition and Labor are deadlocked just weeks away from the state election on March the 23rd. With the parties 50-50 in the two-party preferred result, this represents a 4.3% swing against the government, with 6 seats lost if repeated uniformly across the state, resulting in Gladys Berejiklian losing her majority. Coalition's primary vote has increased 1 point to 40%. Labor's primary vote has remained at 36%. While Ms Berejiklian still leads on the better Premier count, but the gap has narrowed dramatically by 6 points, actually, since the last news poll. The latest news around the New South Wales state election, the Australian's New South Wales political editor, Andrew Clennell, joins me live from our CBD studio. Andrew, around Sydney we can see all the banners up, red and blue and green, and goodness me, but it's getting tighter and tighter, isn't it?
It really is extraordinarily tight, but it has been tight for some time, Ticky. I mean, we did a news poll a year ago, it was 50-50. We did one a month ago, it was 50-50. And now it's 50-50 again. So you start to wonder whether there's any point polling unless there's some real momentum shift in the last couple of days.
So you don't see the Premier slipping at all, because there seems to be this this feeling that somehow Michael Daly is actually inching ahead.
Well, there's certainly a feeling that he's lifted his profile, and I think that shows in his satisfaction rating and the better Premier figures. But that doesn't seem to be translating to votes, and it's quite an effective argument that the coalition has about the bad old Labor government 8 years ago. They were cancelling projects, there was a lot of corruption. And so I think a lot of people are sort of thinking they wouldn't mind voting against the coalition, but they can't bring themselves to vote for Labor yet. And that's Labor's problem, really. If they didn't have that baggage, I think they would be ahead. The fact that they're mostly, by the way, not because of any particular bad management by the Berejiklian government. The economy's absolutely booming here. There's been a few controversies over infrastructure projects like the light rail and the stadiums builds, but generally speaking, New South Wales never been in a better economic position. But Gladys Berejiklian's just been unable to sell a message effectively and stick to a message. And she hasn't performed well politically, and that's why we see the party's deadlocked at 50-50. And there is a bit of a sense for change, but there's also a sense that the change doesn't want to be to Labor. So people are actually sort of saying to me, I don't want to vote Liberal, but I can't bring myself to vote Labor.
What about the two personalities? I mean, on one hand, you've got Gladys, who everybody's seems to be trying to sort of sex her up, you know, the image, so that she's her launch video seems to be full of sort of blooper-heavy stuff to make her all groovy. Meanwhile, Michael Daly's off, you know, trying to sort of demand things and saying that Narrabri's never going to go ahead out there. He's sitting down with Alan Jones, and you know, they both seem to be doing quite radical things.
Yeah, they do, because when you get to 50-50, you need a game changer to get ahead. But they're both spending a lot of money, that's for sure, promising a lot of money. And last time when Mike Baird ran, at least he was promising the sale of assets to pay for everything. These guys are just promising an absolute bucket load, and they have no real plan to pay, so we go into debt. I mean, Berejiklian so far has promised $28 billion. Michael Daly's now up today from 14 to 21 billion. So it's a big spending campaign. Stuff? Sorry?
Can anyone keep up with the stadium story? I am very confused.
Well, I have to keep up with it, unfortunately, Ticky. I'm paid to keep up with it. But look, I mean, I think that essentially, how do you put it? Gladys was between the SCG Trust and Alan Jones on one side, who wanted Allianz knocked down and rebuilt at Moore Park, next to the SCG. And the NRL on the other side, who wanted ANZ at the old Sydney Olympic Park at Homebush knocked down and rebuilt. So she ended up trying to please everyone and stuffed herself up a bit in the process. She said, well, we can do both at once. Or as she said at the campaign launch, we can do it all. Well, good luck doing it all.
Yeah, right. Well, that's a very good description. What's your best bet as to what will happen come election time?
I think coalition minority, but look, anything can happen. I wouldn't be surprised if Labor squeaked their way into power. It really is one of those elections where it's like a footy game you've got to watch to the last minute. I mean, if someone makes a huge gaffe on the second last day or comes out with a really bold performance on the second or last day, they'll probably fall over the line. But we're minority government for sure, coalition in the box seat on that. Michael Daly, I reckon, needs another 1.5% in the 2PP, and Gladys needs another 1% in the 2PP to get majority. That's where we're at. But we're basically looking at a result where no one wins, because the public's not really that energised by either side.
OK, well, Andrew, hope you've got a second to give us your insights next week with any luck, but thank you so much for them today. It's been great. Thanks.
Pleasure.
After the break, Australian Banking Association CEO Bligh.
Now, back to Ticky.
Welcome back to Banking. A new report from former Public Service Commissioner Stephen Sedgwick has found that the banks are on track to meet their Royal Commission deadline for the overhaul of staff pay, which you remember was a really prickly issue. This is despite criticism, though, from ASIC yesterday, with the corporate regulator complaining that banks have been too slow in structurally responding to the Royal Commission, specifically when it comes to reviewing their fees for no service practices. So how should we assess the report card? Well, for more, I'm joined by CEO of the Australian Banking Association, Bligh. Anna, welcome back.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Let's talk about the thumbs up that you got. And this goes back to Stephen Sedgwick's report a while ago, wasn't it, that banks really need to move on this?
Yes, so banks contracted Stephen in 2016 to have a really good look at this issue of how incentives might be, motivating people.
So this is long ahead of the Royal Commission.
Yes, but so Stephen gave the report, said got to be a big overhaul. You have to break the nexus between people's incentive programs, bonuses, and direct sales targets. And it's such a big cultural shift, and it's such a big kind of change. He said you've got to have it all done by December 2020. So the Royal Commission,
for 3 years.
3 years. Yeah. Remembering we're talking, more than 100,000 staff, and to really embed it. So the Royal Commission, when it looked at a number of the case studies, it expressed concern about how incentives might have rewarded the wrong behaviour. And the Royal Commission's recommendation on remuneration was that the banking industry should fully implement the Sedgwick report, both to the letter and the spirit.
Yes.
So we're halfway through the process, and so the industry thought now is the right time to take another deep dive and make sure we're on track.
Yes.
Is it being implemented well, properly? Is anyone lagging? Are there things that we need to pick up the pace on? And it's very encouraging, I think, with such a big cultural shift that Stephen's independent report makes it clear that very good progress has been made, but for the most part, banks are well on track to be.
So broadly, I mean, some would say, well, for heaven's sake, I mean, of course it should be like that. I mean, you're saying that banks are retraining frontline staff to encourage a customer-first approach rather than a sales-first mindset. If I'd asked, say, Ian Henschke, a year ago, or whenever it was, 18 months ago, he'd have come back and said, oh, no, we've got a customer-first approach anyway. We don't have a sales-first approach. Well, clearly this is acknowledging that, you did have a sales approach.
And that's what Stephen Sedgwick's report said in 2017. And I don't want to present this as the work is all done, because it isn't. More work needs to be done. And I know on the face of it, it sounds like it's, might be a no-brainer, but it's not a matter of just saying, right, we'll no longer have sales targets. It's then, how will we assess your performance? And Stephen Sedgwick said you need to have a balanced scorecard that measures how well you serve customers, how well...
and more about the time it takes to serve customers.
Exactly. Whether you're doing things timely, whether customers are having a good experience, whether they're getting the right outcome. So working out the best measures of that is not necessarily straightforward.
And also highlighted the lack of action on the mortgage broking remuneration side. That's still got a bit of work there to do.
That's certainly the area that Stephen's progress report pointed the need for more action and to move faster. However, he did acknowledge that the sort of mortgage broker remuneration issue has become complicated by recommendations from the Royal Commission, which
indeed, it might all change anyway.
And then the government's response to that and the opposition's response to that. So I think we need to see some of the dust settle after the election to see how those things will play together.
So coming back to the criticism that you got from the regulator this week, or the banks did, an update, this further review on how the banks are going with the fee for no service failures and remediation. And it was a very poor report card. Why is it so bad, Anna?
Well, I think the fact that these two reports came out on the same day, it actually gives you a sense of or within 2 days of each other, the size and the breadth of the reform and transformation process that is happening in banks. And like all big change programs, some things are moving a little faster than you might have predicted, others not as fast as you had hoped.
Now, why is this good enough? And I ask that because, firstly, fee for no service was the standout atrocity, frankly, I would say, in terms of its size. And secondly, September last year, ASIC came out with its breach report, which was again a absolute roasting of the banks, talking about unacceptable delays, 4.5 years to identify significant breaches. I could go on. Now, given that they had the warning lights and then come Hayne and they say, ASIC, go harder, this further review has come up with another failure. I mean, what are you expecting ASIC to do with this now?
Well, I wouldn't say for 1 minute that anything here is good enough. I think ASIC has sent a very clear message to banks. that the sort of timeframes they might have once been able to enjoy on these sorts of remediation programs are a thing of the past. That ASIC is going to delve in and see what's happening, and if it's not good enough, ASIC is going to make that public, and I think that it sends a very clear message to banks.
But are
about
they
where
going to get, do you think BEAR
be.
will come into action? I mean, if this sort of performance happens at one or more of the big four banks, can you see APRA, for example, implementing some sort of BEAR executive, you know, docking pay or affecting bonuses, that sort of stuff, so that it really hurts?
Well, ultimately that's going to be, you know, APRA oversees the BEAR regime, but it's only very, very young. And I'm sure they
could get a first outing over something like this, though, couldn't it?
I'm sure they'll turn their mind to it. One of the other recommendations of the Hayne Commission was that ASIC should also have some responsibilities on some conduct issues in the BEAR regime, and this could at some stage be one of the things that they might consider. But you know, I think on this one it's important to recognise that ASIC's report does identify the scale of this project, and I think the CEOs who appeared before the House of Reps last week indicated that on some of the remediation programs, and this is likely to be one of them, frankly, they were too slow for too long, but they have, and they didn't, as ASIC said, put enough resources into getting it done quickly, but that they have remedied that and the pace has picked up. But you know, it needs to go faster, and I think there's some very big learnings here about the time it takes is not going to be that it's taken in the past is not going to be tolerated in the future, and that means big investment in systems, big investment in compliance, and a lot of senior leadership attention and focus on progress reporting. Are we on track? Are we on track? And you know, going back, that's what the Sedgwick progress report was. I didn't want to find out in November 2020 that we weren't on track. I wanted to know now if things were lagging. And
ASIC will pick you up if they're not.
Yes.
All right. Well, look, we will definitely keep tracking you guys. So one thumbs up and one very much thumbs down. But Anna Bligh, we'll see how we go. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's all for the show tonight. Tomorrow night, Australian Super CEO Ian Henschke. Thanks for your company.